Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen. How's that looking, Alita? Thumbs up. Everybody see that?
Yeah, looks great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. As Alita said, my name is Andrew. I'm with the Center for Sustainable Ag at the University of Vermont, in Extension specifically. And I'm excited to present some findings from the Aspires Listening Tour that took place over the past couple of years, which was a project led by the Food Systems Research Center, which is now actually the Food Systems Research Institute. And that's in partnership with some community food system leaders across New England, who I'll talk about as well. But mostly going to share what we learned from this process from the perspective of Mainers to the extent possible, and to discuss how this research can inform some future collaborations and next steps as well. So thinking about why we conduct the Aspires Listening Tour, the purpose, the goals, methodology. We began the Aspires Listening Tour, which is an acronym actually for Alternative System Pathways for Interconnected Resilience, Equity, and Sustainability. This was a multi-year commitment by the Food Systems Research Institute to explore community-driven research for regional food systems challenges. So the listening tour was this first step in the process where we wanted to hear from practitioners of food systems work. So people working in the food system every day that are either using data, collecting data, conducting research, using research to inform their work. So the purpose of the listening tour was to hear directly from stakeholders about what research is needed most, understand the food system challenges from those working in the field, and identify opportunities to create research that is practical and actionable. So you can see the project team was the Food Systems Research Center, which is now the Institute, Center for Sustainable Ag, Center for Rural Studies, both within UVM, and the Northbound Ventures consulting firm, who I imagine at least a couple of you are familiar with. Scott and Holly of Northbound Ventures. They lived in Maine for some time and are now in Vermont, but do really fantastic regional food system consulting work. And the state level partners and regional partners that you see there were completely essential to this process, without whom we wouldn't have been able to reach folks and ask folks to participate in this process. So a big shout out to those folks, and specifically the Maine Food Strategy for helping us with the main aspect of this work. So again, throughout this process, we asked, what challenges do you face? What research would be most helpful? And rather than prescribing solutions, the process was about building partnerships while also identifying these main most pressing research priorities based on community expertise. So we had a pre-survey where we asked folks to answer questions, open-ended questions that would then prepare them for group discussions in a focus group or smaller individual listening sessions. And we would analyze those questions beforehand to identify some themes that would help to anchor participants in a conversation in these small group settings. And the facilitator would use those survey results, as I said, to guide those listening sessions. So kind of a multifaceted data collection experience that involved survey work as well as just capturing live responses of qualitative information from folks as they participated in small group listening sessions or focus groups. So to ensure we captured a broad range of perspectives, as I said, we use this multi-method approach to data collection. So the pre-survey, pre-session surveys, where folks were asked to talk about their work, their priorities in the food system, what research would be more, would help them or their organizations to be more effective, any challenges they faced in accessing and using research. We had a couple of tabling events at different conferences around the region. And then we hosted listening sessions that were either sector specific, so bringing together people that worked in similar areas, or general statewide sessions that were open to any and all food system professionals in that state. So the sessions were primarily virtual to maximize accessibility and participation. The post-session analysis of analyzing the survey and the transcripts for key themes took place, and so common research priorities were and needs were synthesized into a final report, with those guiding questions as kind of driving forward how we were doing analysis. And I'll be happy to share the link to the final report to folks as well. So yeah, multi-coder notes for all of the analysis. These four key questions were the, I suppose, overarching themes that we tried to keep in mind as we were doing the analysis. And again, I'm not going to go too in depth about this because you can read it a little more specifically if you'd like to look at the final report, which I'll share as well. So yeah, we had about 350 or so participants in all, across 24 listening sections, representation from all 6 New England states, stakeholders from across the food system, so nonprofits, farmers, processors, distributors, researchers, policymakers, educators, gardeners, all sorts of people, that we felt pretty happy about representationally in terms of the breakdown of population by state and whatnot, and actual actors that we were able to reach. So by and far, it came as no surprise that the majority of the folks that we reached, we considered to be nonprofit or community organizations. But again, representation across the spectrum in terms of stakeholders that were engaged in various sectors of the food system. So moving on to kind of the bulk of our findings. This is to begin, I just like to throw up this word cloud about asking folks about what about their food system is going well. And this is a regional representation, not just for the state of Maine, but regionally, collaboration and networking. I'm not sure funding would be this big nowadays. That might have changed since 2023 and 2024. I would be willing to bet that it has. But at any rate, folks, I think generally speaking, feel positive about the work that they're doing, about the engagement that they have with their partners, about the future prospects of their work, about the relationships and the engagement that they have within their communities. I like to just start off our conversations by talking about what's going well, as opposed to maybe what's not going so well. So anyway, moving on. To begin with, why do food system professionals need research? So before thinking about specific research topics that we identified, we think it's important to understand why food system professionals and organizations need research in the first place. So through our survey and in conversations, the top 3 reasons that food system professionals say they need research emerge. So beyond just gathering information, thinking about strengthening decision making, shaping policy, and improving health and well-being. So number 1, economic and market development. Folks said that they need research to guide investments, support local markets, improve the economic viability of farms, food businesses, and regional supply chains. So some key research questions they asked were, what market opportunities exist for small and mid-sized farms? How can local food businesses increase profitability while maintaining fair wages and prices? A main example from one of the listening sessions, an individual said, without better data on which markets and infrastructure really work for small farms, we're left guessing where to invest. And that was an anonymous coordinator. I won't use names for any of these main examples, but yeah, any example or quote that I give is going to be something that we pulled from Maine specifically. So number 2, local and regional planning. So folks said that they'd like to design interventions and programs with regional needs and priorities. So what policies and investments will help New England produce and consume more regional food? And how can communities involve local food security while also strengthening local farm economies? So a Maine respondent in this case said local governments want to invest in food systems, but without clear data, they don't know where the biggest gaps or opportunities are, which I think probably rings true for a lot of smaller rural communities in Maine and in Vermont as well, where I'm based. Number three, maximizing human health and well-being. Folks said that they need research in order to tailor their programming to meet community health needs and ensure that food policies promote long-term well-being. Speaking of access to healthy food, local food impact, like how does local food and fresh food impact community health outcomes, long-term benefits of food as medicine programs. Those are some of the things that folks in the state of Maine are interested in seeing. And a quote from a Maine respondent is, we need long-term studies showing how access to local food actually improves community health. And if it's the missing piece to getting programs funded, which I think makes a lot of sense. Moving right along, next, why do we need, or what drives research needs? Why do we need this research? So thinking about the bigger picture of food systems research, why do food system professionals and organizations need research in the first place? Stakeholders emphasize that research isn't just about knowledge generation, although that is a core part of the point of research in general, but about ensuring that data and insights drive real change. Specifically across food systems and policies and funding again. So in informing and strengthening on the ground work, folks said that they need research to make more effective and informed decisions in their daily work, needing data to guide their strategies and measure their impact. So one Maine respondent said, farmers can't afford to gamble on investments. We need research that shows what actually improves profitability over time. And I really liked that quote as well. Informing policy decisions and shaping future programs. There are quite a few policymakers or folks that work in the policy arena across New England responded to our survey and participated in the listening sessions. And they overwhelmingly said that data and research is something they rely on in order to create and refine food system policies. And they need research that's practical, timely, and reflective of real world conditions. Folks mentioned a lot of policies around SNAP incentives, universal school meals, food as medicine, and then just generally trying to understand more about how research and data can inform state and federal grant programming for serving small farms or small food businesses. So a Maine respondent in this case said, too many funding programs are designed for large farms. We need data to prove that small and mid-sized farms deserve a fair share. And third, advocating for more effective and equitable funding. Folks overwhelmingly said that they struggle to secure sustainable funding for their work, and that research and data play a critical role in demonstrating impact, securing new investments, and ensuring that funding is allocated where it's needed most. So where is funding currently going? What are the gaps in how resources are distributed? That kind of thing. And a Maine respondent in this case said, funders want numbers, not just stories. So we need help to collect the data that shows the true impact of our programs, which rang true to me quite a bit. That was an interesting thing that came out of Maine as well. Just in this case, in terms of a suggested solution, is a few different people in Maine talked about creating standardized research tools for organizations to measure and report on the impact in the state of Maine, which I thought was really interesting, and utilizing that data to analyze how funding trends in Maine address certain gaps and how resources are distributed throughout the state. So just kind of a little anecdotal Maine aspect to that I thought was interesting. So now kind of beyond why the what and kind of the reason behind why food system professionals say they need research, now thinking about just the specific topics that were identified throughout the listening tour. So three major areas of research that need more attention. Number one, processing, distribution, and farming infrastructure, which I would think is pretty relevant to this group. Folks said specifically, overwhelmingly, that the regional food system, their local food system, statewide food system can't grow without the right infrastructure. So needing better access to processing facilities, cold storage, transportation, aggregation hubs, industrial scale supplies, that kind of thing. So data and kind of research questions around what are the biggest infrastructure gaps for regional food processing and distribution, and what kind of data or research would help to inform what could make local food supply chains more efficient. A quote from a Maine respondent that I think would be universally true is, "We can't scale up if we have to drive 3 hours just to find a processor." That is overwhelmingly true for a wide variety of farmers and folks involved in this space throughout New England, not just in Maine. New markets and alternative food systems. So a lot of people mention this idea about rethinking traditional food distribution models as key to both food access and the nutritional side of things and food security, but also farm profitability. So thinking about what data and research are required to expand farm to institution programs that could benefit farmers and institutions simultaneously. What role does secondary food markets play in all of this? So food recovery, upcycling, surplus redistribution, that kind of thing. Again, from the state of Maine, farm to institution could be huge, but small scale farms can't always meet the requirements. So research could help fix that. And I really liked that quote as well. Number three is the third most common desired research topic that folks mentioned, is farming as a profession. So attracting and retaining new farmers while ensuring existing farmers can make a living. What policies can support that? What policies can help new farmers enter the industry? How can we improve farm viability and ensure farmers earn a living wage? What are the biggest barriers to farm succession planning? Different research questions like that. And a respondent from Maine said, "We're losing farmers faster than we can replace them. Succession planning and fair wages are critical." So moving along, thinking about how we've outlined the priority research topics. So next, thinking about how the research could be conducted and what important considerations are necessary to keep in mind when thinking about conducting this type of research. So making it clear that how we conduct research matters just as much as the topic of the research that's being conducted. That was something we were really interested to hear from folks about from across the region, and they certainly let us know their wide variety of perspectives about this topic. And overwhelmingly, folks said, number one, that the research needs to be accessible and appropriate. Existing data is not collected often enough. It may not be relevant to local decision making. It may be too infrequent. It may be outdated. It may be too broad. And generally speaking, communities need real-time data to adapt quickly to changing food system needs. So a Maine individual that responded said, "National data doesn't reflect what's happening here in Maine, so we need timely and local information to help us make decisions better." Second, folks also mentioned that the need to measure not just economic impacts, but social and environmental impacts as well was important to folks. So traditional economic impact studies might be helpful, but they may not capture the whole picture. So having social and environmental outcomes alongside financial returns would be critical to making the case for funders and policymakers, as just one example to kind of tie that topic back into the rest of what we've discussed. Thinking about evaluation frameworks that have both direct and indirect benefits of food system initiatives. integrating health and environmental and economic impact assessments all into one. And a main example from that is if you can show that food as medicine saves on healthcare costs, it changes the whole conversation with funders. So I think that, even though that's an economic benefit, thinking about saving money in a healthcare sense, that's also really a nutritional benefit as well. And food as medicine programs, in this case, as this main respondent stated, have these kind of overlapping effects that move beyond just economic benefits, but are also showing economic benefits at the same time. So kind of that, cross collaborative impact was something folks mentioned quite a bit. And then third, research being reciprocal and a means of strengthening communication. So while research could be often conducted in communities, folks said more often than not, the communities that are involved in research don't see the results. So this notion of findings being published in academic journals may not mean they're accessible, that data is therefore then not accessible to practitioners. Reports can be dense and technical and limit usefulness, and having a little follow-up to collaboration after the research is completed. And I think a main respondent put it quite well when she said, we give our time to research, but too often we never hear back and the results are never shown with us. So that's pretty clear, pretty on the point. Pretty on the point that needs to be addressed in terms of how folks are conducting research in the future. And so to kind of round things up, thinking about future research priorities, I've talked about what research topics matter, how research should be conducted, and what kind of priorities people have. So transitioning then to where should we focus future research efforts and funding? So through the listening tour, a few different, I'm just going to focus on the top three overarching priorities that folks said reflect the areas where food system professionals believe that research could have the most direct impact. So you might recognize these themes because there are overarching themes that I think go throughout this entire presentation that all sort of weave together and into this overarching idea of economic impact and market development. So folks are looking for research that supports the economic sustainability of local and regional food system. And while there's a strong interest in scaling up regional markets, folks overwhelmingly said that they need data to guide investment decisions and ensure that the growth is strategic and sustainable. Again, should be familiar in forming local and regional policy. So local and regional decision makers, from policy makers, nonprofit leaders, educators, say they rely on research to guide strategic planning, funding allocation, policy development, and that by and large, they lack localized data, up-to-date data, and all types of data that reflect rapidly changing food system landscapes. So thinking about food access maps, land use models, how policy changes and how that impacts regional production. How can communities use zoning, tax incentive, land conservation? What are the biggest gaps in food access, and how can local governments better support food security? These are all things that were mentioned in the state of Maine as specific to this regional perspective as well. And lastly, just in terms of where we should focus food systems research efforts, broadly speaking, a large number of the folks that responded to our survey and that participated in our listening sessions said that they want to focus on the intersection of food, health, and community well-being. So how food is involved in nutrition, public health, social equity, and how evidence-based solutions can be used to prove that. So again, food as medicine programs, what are the long-term health benefits? How does the increased access to locally grown food affect community health? Doctors wanting to prescribe fresh food but needing long-term proof that it improves health to make it a sustainable program are all things that folks in the state of Maine mentioned. So to kind of round things out here, the Aspires listening tour was this extremely valuable tool, I think, for the University of Vermont, for the Food Systems Research Institute, and for the regional and state level partners that we worked with. Lots of conversations took place, and lots of conversations are continuing to be had for how we can utilize the Aspires data to engage in community-driven research. And focus more broadly on collaboration and community-centered research efforts. And so as we are transitioning from the Aspires listening tour phase into the post-Aspires listening tour phase, this, me being here today, is a part of the process of reflecting on what we've learned and to kind of clarify what the findings were, and to sort of signify this shift towards the continuation of collaborative relationships with organizations throughout the region, and the Food Systems Research Institute. So there is no surprise, I think, with many people in this room, that the funding landscape has dramatically shifted since we began this Aspires listening process. And the Food Systems Research Institute, being a partnership with the USDA Food Systems Research Unit at the ARS, is no different from that, and in some ways maybe even more susceptible, since they're directly funded through the Farm Bill. So the funding opportunities and the continuation of working relationships with folks is by no means as robust as they had originally planned, given the lack of funding and kind of immediate pause on all of the funding that happened. But the themes that were identified in Aspires do form the priority areas for the Food Systems Research Institute. And this next phase is thinking about reimagining and co-creating research together with organizations at the regional level or at the state or local level to kind of structure and make these next research priorities more of a sustainable priority. So generally speaking, the idea is that the Food Systems Research Institute will continue to be collaborative, continue to seek out new relationships, and eventually have funding opportunities that they can share with folks throughout the region to build upon some of these priorities that were identified. But as I said, the landscape is fraught right now and is really confusing. So TBD as far as timeline, as things kind of hopefully fall into a rhythm. But nonetheless, this research and this data, these data are things that I hope state level organizations or local organizations can utilize for the benefit of their own programming, and for this kind of strategic visioning of the work that they'd like to do in their state or in their area. So I think just kind of, I'm going to stop sharing. And in the sense of trying to continue to make whatever strides are possible, even with the precariousness of the funding landscape. I'm happy to continue to have conversations with folks in any way that they would like to think about the way that this data could be beneficial to their work, to your work. I know, for one, that sometimes when you're writing a grant proposal, if you can put in some hard numbers from a recent data collection process that could advocate for the type of funding that you're trying to maintain or trying to garner, that could make a big difference. And so I'm happy, I would be delighted if the data from the Aspires project could play a role in any of this working group's future priorities. And I'm happy to have those conversations at another time, for people to, reach out and chat. So I'm going to put in the chat right now the link to the larger Aspires listening tour report, as well as my contact information, and just leave it there for now, I think. Happy to answer any questions, but otherwise I'm super happy to just have met everyone and to show my face and talk about this work and highlight some of the great work that we're doing and hopefully to build new relationships together. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate the way that you were able to draw out the main specific quotes and takeaways. That's definitely appreciated with this audience. I know I have some questions, but I want to open the floor to others. So I will mute myself and encourage others to come off mute and ask questions. Go for it, Catherine.
Yeah, so I think mine's not as much of a question as it is a statement, and I'm sorry that I missed out on this listening session back in March. The beginning of my year has just been a blur with everything that's going on with our business. But what I've come across for both Five Pillars Butchery and Lewiston Auburn Community Market, which is a multicultural, multi-stakeholder co-op, there's no data on cultural markets. It's really difficult to get hard numbers. It's really difficult to get anecdotal information to put into grants. And it makes it difficult to prove feasibility if you're going to financiers, to prove feasibility even if you are trying to get a grant to support that. It is an expanding, growing, and probably the fastest growing market in the United States, both meat and other products. And I think that if producers are looking to expand their markets, this type of research is really important to pull together. So that's number one. And secondly, the other piece that I have come across in our own business is the struggle of small to mid-sized farms having scalability to participate in institutions, institutional sales, combined with Maine farmers and maybe New England farmers being excessively independent and opposed to co-ops that would help them reach the institutions. And so those are just two pieces that I would like to add. And I don't know if you can fit those into future research. That'd be really great. But yeah, that's it. Thank you. And thanks for sharing out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to speak to your first part, the specificity with which different folks mentioned market opportunities that are difficult to include in these like key level areas, that's why I think it's important and happy to engage with folks in a way to tease out more state level specific information if folks are interested, right? Like halal markets, just as one example, because I was having that conversation this morning, just as an opportunity for different halal meat processing in New England is something that is a growing, burgeoning kind of market opportunity. And I personally don't do that kind of work, so I would not have thought that. And but for processing and infrastructure working groups, it would be, I don't think that was something that anyone in Maine said specifically, but there are other states that did mention that as one example. So without having that information, how would folks know that that could be a possible opportunity for their group or for their planning process, right? So I completely agree, and thanks for sharing.
Other questions for Andrew? Don't be shy. We do have to wrap right at 12, unfortunately, today. So get your questions in. And sorry to interrupt.
And also, no, I was just going to say, if you come up with something later, that's why I put my email in the chat. So don't hesitate to reach out.
And am I understanding this right, Andrew, that you are offering to somebody like Catherine who is trying to dig up some specific numbers around or information around things like cultural markets? If are you willing to sort of like dig back into your research to pull those things out?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can just, it's not this insane data set. I don't know that I could actually share specifics beyond what I've shared today. I would have to check with the Food Systems Research Institute, but getting kind of quantitative or qualitative data that could help to inform the direction of a proposal or work that you're, that's no problem at all. I would be happy to have a meeting with this group again if you all have, 3 or 4 or 10 different things that you're interested in knowing. If the Aspires listening tour was able to get that, maybe we could tease it out of the data and use it for your purposes. I'm happy to explore that for sure.
Thank you.
So because, if my presentation didn't make it clear, processing and infrastructure, distribution networks and aggregation networks by and far in the top 3 things that the entire region mentioned. So that's one of the reasons I was excited to come to this group, is just, there needs to be more working groups like this around the region, and I'm sure there are. But developing the infrastructure and having data and research that can back up the need for, a feasibility study or something like that to understand where more processing and aggregation and distribution networks could form in the region was a huge aspect of what we gleaned from this. So, yeah.
Yeah, no surprise there. I'm curious if you did encounter any surprises in your research and what those were.
I don't, yeah, nothing too surprising. I mean, there's always going to be the outliers, when you're surveying a group of 400 people, there's always going to be 1 to 2 to 5, things that are like extremely specific and extremely niche. I personally wasn't expecting land access to be as big as it was either. I knew that was very important, but or not so much land access, because that's obviously important, in which we tied into this like farmer secession key theme here, a secession theme of next generation of farmers and land access and paying farmers sustainable wage and those kind of underlying sub themes. But I think I don't know if surprising is the right word, but just this desperate need for local or more specific data that is captured at a federal level. So a lot of people are really interested in this mapping, some sort of mapping process to understand like current use of land in Western Massachusetts, in Northern Maine, in Central New Hampshire, right? A lot of people mentioned this desire to have an understanding of specifically what farmers are growing, what land is being used for, what it could be used for, what the land use is, and how policies could be tailored to influencing whatever changes those folks are interested in seeing. So that, I think, I wasn't expecting to be as I was not expecting farming as a profession and land access and whatnot to be one of the top 3 sub themes, I guess. But further reflection, like maybe it shouldn't have been surprising, but I don't know.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question.
Well, I will just put my contact information in the chat again, along with the link to the report. Take a look at the report if you want to, even if you spend 10 or 15 minutes just kind of thumbing through it, maybe it'll spark an idea for you, or, spark a question that you might have. And as I said, don't hesitate to reach out. You want to have a conversation, you want to plan another meeting like this as a group, anything you'd like, I'm happy to chat more and see if the report can be useful. So yeah, thanks
Great.
everybody for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time and your generosity with offering further conversation. We will be in touch.
Perfect. Great. Thanks everybody. Take care.
Bye, Andrew.